If you have more questions about it, there's a few things I've got in here towards the end that might be of interest. If you're interested, hit me up afterwards. Other than that, for today, Adam wanted to bring value to you guys. And of course, nicest day of the week, probably the nicest day of the next 10 days we're going to have. So I hope to make this time valuable for you guys. And, as I think through other growers I've talked to and, neighbors, people I work with, I tried to think through, okay, well, what are 3 things that are probably most top of mind that are going to be most valuable? And that's what we'll go through here today. So red crown rot, who's familiar with that? Probably half this room. Few generalizations around making some product comparisons. I watch guys compare products, whether it be hybrids, varieties, fungicides, and there's a few things I feel like always get jumped over. So I want to highlight some things there. And then fertility. I mean, I don't know who's paid their fertilizer bills or who's doing what on dry, but if you're looking at dry phosphates in that 38 to 45 cents a pound for a product, how much product you're running, and say potash in that 20 to 23 cents a pound for product, it's high dollar. So I understand there's been a lot of adjustments, so we'll tee up some of that at the end. So we'll start in with red crown rot. Just a background on this. 2017, 2018. That's when that was first either suspected, found. Pike County, Illinois. That's how close this was. That was the first place that it was found in Illinois. I don't know. 2017 I think it was suspected. 18 is when it was confirmed. Different sources kind of debate that. Soil-borne disease. Now, for those of you who've had it, I don't know if anybody's went continuous corn yet, but it's one of those things you might want to think about. Or at least invest in a good seed treatment, which we'll get to some of that here. But it persists in the soil. So in Pike County, where they found it 2017, 2018, one of the trials the university set up was, okay, well, let's go continuous corn for 4 years, see what happens. Come back into it, rotate back, still got hit with red crown rot. So even some of those long-term, moving to another crop didn't benefit. It infects early, like SDS. So, it was like, hey, I got bad SDS. I'm going to wait till soils warm up and I'll plant later because SDS infects cold and wet. Red crown rot likes warm and wet. So if you wait, especially like even all the way out to double crop beans, I've seen it annihilate double crop beans. So planting conditions really don't help a lot. The plants, it's kind of neat, like how fast it actually kills plants. I've got some time lapse to go through in here. For those of you who've experienced it, what yield loss can happen. For those of you that haven't, you can take word, or we'll show some examples in here. So to identify this, first portion, sometimes you'll see late, say 3rd week of July, 4th week of July, some of these fields that, beans start to look like they're under a lot of stress, drought stress, dying back. To me, it looks very similar to SDS, can be confused with a lot of other diseases. To me, it looks a little more vibrant, like SDS, everything kind of fades together, but this seems like it's more of a true brown and then kind of like a highlighter yellow and a highlighter green. It's very interesting toxins moving into the leaves. If you split the stems, sometimes it gets confused with, brown stem rot, which this will be rotting now. So you split them. One easy way to characterize it to make sure and confirm you actually have it is you get these fruiting bodies that are on that lower portion of the stem. If you pull up a plant and you see these, pretty good to bet it's red crown rot. It's amazing. There's Pioneer just launched an article on this discussing the dispersal of it. And so primary infection's that soil-borne. But there's thoughts that these release spores and you can have a secondary infection later in the season, which I didn't have a picture of it to toss in here, but I saw where deer had ran through a hot spot in the field and that deer path had lit up later on that season. So that's how easy this spreads. Now, should you clean equipment or anything else, they think it's windborne. So you can make you feel better to clean your own equipment, but odds are if somebody's got another field, harvest beans later, wind's in the air, blows across, you're probably going to get it depending on where the dust falls. So really, it's a nice effort to try and clean equipment, but it's probably not going to help. So Victrado from Syngenta. I've got slides from Syngenta that they shared with our group. It's one of those things we work with some other companies that'll come in. So I wanted to highlight a few things from what they showed us. So Victrado, didn't know if we were going to have it for 26. Thought it was going to be 27. For those of you that have experience with red crown rot, have you ordered Victrado for your beans? I highly recommend it. Absolutely. If you have not gotten Victrado, I still think you probably should. I don't know if locally, if Saltro will be, I don't know if they'll even keep it. I can't speculate on that, but I think everybody ought to move into the Victrado camp. So new Timerium technology, it's one of these group 7s. So, it's going to be a replacement for Saltro is the main thing on it. It's interesting. So every time I've talked to somebody from Syngenta, they want to talk about, well, it's a replacement for Saltro. That's good for SDS. I don't think they want to be known for red crown rot, but this is going to be pretty much the only product on the market, in my opinion, that has any validity to help against red crown rot. Now it's interesting because, this past summer I got to see it in 2 trials that were infested with red crown rot, and I saw it in 1 trial that was not. And in this 1 trial that was not, I'm like, okay, well, here is the Cruiser APX with Saltro, and then here's Cruiser APX with Victrado. It's okay, well, how do they look in the absence of red crown? Well, you could still pick out the difference. And less stem canker, which is caused by your diaporte complex. For those of you who have harvested beans, and I don't know how well it shows up, there's this big old black patch in the middle of this bean field. Have you harvested beans and noticed this odd color sometimes in your fields? So that's all pod and stem blight there, all caused by a diaporte complex. I question or suspect that Victrado might have activity on that as well. At this point, it's pure speculation. We asked the Syngenta guys, like, hey, diseases, you can't always count on them being infected and being treated. I think Victrado, from what I've seen, has activity. When I've asked the Syngenta guys, they're like, well, we're looking into it. They kind of have that little smile of, yes, I think they agree. They can't label it yet. So I think this product's actually going to do more. So if you don't have red crown rot, I still think it's good validity of this is a product you probably ought to consider.
And it is now also the only product that has EPA, USDA, all the approvals on the market for red crown.
Yep.
So they got that through with this past fall.
Yep.
So, and just to be clear, Brian does not work for Syngenta. It's just what he's seen from just an economic standpoint. So,
oh yeah. Well, so other questions I get about it, is it going to be as effective on SDS? They throw it in Petri dishes. You look at Olivo. Olivo is always very famous for SDS control. You look at where Olivo, it's going to be treated out about in here. You can look at the control on fungi. You look at Victrado, where it's treated, its use rate is going to be more like in here. So I believe from what they've shown, it's going to be just as effective on SDS as what Olivo was. So I don't think we're giving up anything there, switching to it. I've seen some pictures from Syngenta on this. You've got 1 row here. It's like, okay, well, Victrado looks great. And here's one of just their standard treatment. And you can see these plants dying down. Now, I believe these were from Hamel. And I thought it was interesting from their presentation on it, for those of you maybe haven't seen it. So this picture is August 13th, 2-row plots, 2 rows of Victrado, 2 rows of the standard Cruiser PX Saltro. You go 1 week to the 22nd, you start to see some spots that are coming out. By the 29th, you watch how fast that starts to depress, and then all the way into September. They claim out of this 40 bushel. So looks great. This was all Syngenta's findings. So now we're going to go into mine. So Google shot, just out of maps, all these little lightning bolts are places that I've seen as hotspot areas of either growers I've worked with or places I've been. And these aren't like, okay, I just found a little spot in the field, this is a concern. These are areas where within a 5-mile radius of that, I can find multiple fields that have had devastating losses. Where I said it came, was found in Eldara, Pike County in 2017-18, that's that little red star at the top. You look at windblown patterns. So my take home from this is, if you're between those red lines, which probably most of this room is, I'm assuming, unless you've got maybe a few outliers, you're in a high risk zone. When I go into 2026 and myself as an agronomist looking for where I'm going to find red crown rot, I'm in between those red lines. Geography I cover, I go all the way up to Auburn, a little bit past 55 here, up towards Jacksonville, big block. Notice I don't even have shots in there. I don't see it up there yet. But here's where I find all the problems. You think about a wind blowing from the south to the east, we're right in line with that.
So does it matter on tillage, like in the fall?
It spreads it faster. They thought tillage would help in the beginning. It's very effective at spreading. It's great. I don't know exactly why. So how it overwinters is like the Microsclerotia, so it's very similar, like a white mold that they deal with up north. So you can have those spores that travel in dirt, but then there's that secondary infection that comes off those ascospores that is more the wind blowing aspect. So I think because it's got two modes that are suspected that it can transmit in, it's, whether you're soil or airborne, it can do them both.
What's
Which is
recommendation? If you're saying tillage can cause it to spread, what's their recommendation then?
so a lot of universities, you go to their funds, they're like, don't know. That's why whenever, Victrado is the only thing out there that I've seen that maybe has efficacy on it. I know there's a lot of work going into, okay, what do we have for variety tolerance? Because even though it's new for us up here in the Corn Belt, it's not new for us as in the country. So, South America deals with this, but then even down, I guess it'd be southern portions of the country, more in peanut country, they've dealt with it down there because same pathogen that causes this causes a black root rot in peanuts. So they've dealt with a little bit of it down there, but more recently it's found its way up here and probably through contaminated seed or some source, and now we get to deal with it in a wider portion. I would expect, much like when tar spot came out, whenever tar spot hit some genetics extremely hard, my guess is, we're going to see some tolerances. They'll breed in some resistance. I would say over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll probably see some more variety resistance. And I think it'll be a combination of varietal and seed treatment. Pictures from a few of those fields. So these are drone shots to give you an idea of how much these can spread. That picture on the far left over there, those are sprayer tracks between 120 foot booms. So that is a year 1 infection point. Did not see it the years prior. These were small spots, like couldn't even detect them on a yield map in these fields on the top right and lower right. Didn't even know they were there in 2023. But it found a plant. It's like, okay, we harvested it, didn't see anything on the yield map, nothing to worry about. Those were probably 25 to 30 bushel off pace for field averages this year. For a field average. Obviously going through these zones, I think monitors will read 10 bushel. I think it's just probably, foreign material that's coming through the monitor. I'm not sure there's actually beans being read. A zoomed in closer picture of what those look like. You can see how much plant death is actually in there from a drone shot. You can see how it spreads out across fields. Doesn't always correspond. These are dry dams and wet areas. So top of a knob and then wet draws shows in both kind of places through a field. In August, you actually walk out there and get boots on the ground. You're walking beans in August. They should be up to your, chest high, hard to walk through, parting them away. I can see bare dirt. It makes it easy for me. The plants die so fast, the leaves actually stay attached. So like with SDS, the plants die a little bit slower. Leaves will fall off, petioles will stay attached. With red crown rot, it's just a complete shutdown. To give you an idea of time lapse on some of these, this field, August 6th to August 18th, it's 12 days. You kind of go from there's something going on out there to, and when these were sprayed with fungicide, probably third week of July, couldn't even see those spots. Field looked green, pretty, no issues. There's the other side of that tree line, same field. Pretty impressive how fast it kills them and spreads. Now what's interesting is, so this was found in 2023 in this field. That's what some of those spots looked like. So this yellow area or yellow arrow that's pointing, you can see how much of that area expanded from those prior times. So it's, if you had a 1 year, didn't think it was a big deal. So say like 2026 was maybe your first time finding it in the field. Based on my experience from it, expect that without doing some kind of management to, treatment, something to come into it. Expect it to be about a 5-fold increase in area. I'd say is a fair number. So a yield map on these two to give you an idea on devastation there. 75 to 90. This field had some terraces in it. You can see where the terraces are at. Most of the field looked fine. In 23, see some yield spots like something going on that fell off in yield, but nothing terrible. And then by the time we get to 2025, reading 30, 35 bushel through a lot of those spots. So a little bit of green did make some bushel, but not much. I do think it's interesting to look at, like I talked about having the seed treatment on there. The secondary infection, I do think that you can manage around it a little bit. So this field, 2023, had a spot of red crown that's here, some other little spots, directly behind this house, you can use these bins as a point of reference. In 25, still present. You can see those beans are a little off, but not as devastating. This was a 2-pass fungicide program. First pass being at about V5. So very early season, try and get ahead of those spores. Nobody from at least from a university standpoint will say yay or nay on that practice yet. The observations I've seen, I think it helps. But again, it's one of those things where it's new enough coming in that hard to predict where it's actually going to infect. Limited observations, but I think it's something worth considering. Throw in something on your herbicide, making an easy trip, just as a way it helps shut down that secondary infection. You can also see in that field, so right up here is where that was at. This field was split with a fungicide. This half had it, this half did not. In 23, this whole lower draw didn't see anything light up, but in 25 absolutely was. So I think the whole thing was present, and we had the right inoculum to have infection. And I think it shows that, that probably that 2-pass fungicide assisted on it. Which in this case, that was a generic Tertigo was all that was ran there. So I don't know if that's the product to have or anything else, but I think having something to knock back control on it, so you don't have to run a premium product twice. And then the last thing I'll comment on from a varietal standpoint, because I have heard some seed dealers make comment of, well, I've watched these beans be lit up and my beans are fine, I haven't seen it. Well, if your seed dealer hadn't seen it, it's because they haven't looked. I haven't seen a clear varietal tolerance. Every company is going to have an issue. Now, some varieties do tolerate it better than others, and that's what this looks like here. So this field, I would say, had a tolerant variety. 2023, you can see where the bad spots were. Still present, but at least half the beans are alive. There's a field boundary line variety change here. This variety is susceptible. And end of the day, you find a variety that's tolerant. Okay, instead of being 20 bushel beans, they're 40. They should have been 80. So it helps, but it's still not a cure-all, be-all, in my opinion, on it. So really, the main thing that's out there at the moment is going to be Victorado. Highly recommend it. I figured you're going to think I'm a salesman for him on this, but some of that's because one of those fields is my own, and I'm like I told him earlier, it's nothing's more motivated than an agronomist that has it on its own farm. And so as I hunt and look, I don't know where price points are coming in. I've had a few people ask me like, well, is it more expensive and extra cost? And I'm like, if you're asking cost, you haven't experienced it. I know when I ordered from my own farm and somebody's like, well, it's going to be a little bit higher. I'm like, I don't care. I'm not going to go cut 30 bushel beans again.
And with that stuff, being able to independently treat, we do Levo, Saltro, all sorts of good stuff. So this is just the results of Brian's finding. And is it going to be the complete solution? It's not going to be the only solution, but it is going to dramatically help. So trying to give everything the best chance possible until Mother Nature just gives us some teeth. But
I mean, you look at like SDS and how long Levo's been effective, and then how long Saltro was effective, and I think it'll help for quite a while. But then also look at how things have went with like Roundup. Roundup was out, worked great for so many years, and now it's an okay grass killer, and that's about it. Same thing. So if this isn't a long-term solution, there'll need to be other things that come down the line, but it's definitely something to be aware of and pay attention to. Yep.
Do you see any difference in fields where guys are incorporating wheat into the rotation?
It depends. So I've seen some fields that had wheat in there, had bad red crown rot pressure from that rotation. If we went through dry like 2023, beans looked fine. Would have been, I can't remember, it was 24 or 5 here. We had a nice, I guess it would have been 24. We had a dry finish here, and it was ugly. So didn't help. It was probably worse. So, and part of that's because warm and wet for infection to take place whenever those beans are trying to emerge and that first root system's coming out. So I'd say basically it's what you're at risk for is, are you going to be wet when those beans are necking through and the first cotyledons are up? If you're wet in that time frame, which you're more likely early, wheat beans, hit or miss, because that's the whole portion of a disease. You've got to have the right environment, the host, pathogen. So wheat beans being dry may not always have the right pathogen or right environment. Any other questions on that one? Hopefully it's not completely terrifying. Trying to be real world perspective on it, of what I've seen. Like say some guys haven't experienced it yet. And when I look through that band, this is a hotspot area. So I think it's something that some dollars can be well spent on. Okay, next thing I'll roll through is just some thoughts around product comparisons. Because you always hear guys are like, well, I had a different experience my neighbor had, and there's all these thoughts. And what I come to always find is, well, guys aren't comparing something that's relevant to their situation. So I just wanted to highlight some things to be aware of. First one of those is around fungicides. I'm sure if I ask this room, do you spray your fungicide? Most probably do on beans, half probably on corn, based on what I've experienced. And some guys are like, well, it doesn't pay on my corn. Some it's like, well, my personal thoughts are not should I spray once, it's should I spray twice? And we think about, well, what are we trying to accomplish? So I threw 3 up here for comparisons. In my opinion, all great products. So you got Miravis Neo, Triva Pro, and Veltima. 2 of those are Syngenas, 1 of those is BASFs. The thing to think about is, I hear guys are like, well, my neighbor sprayed a fungicide, didn't see a benefit, I'm not going to spray. Okay, well, what'd you spray? Fungicide is such a big, wide, generic term. And so you look at the actives. Well, all 3 of these have got a group 11, but you've got 2 with azoxystrobin, 1 with pyroxystrobin. So you've got different actives that are going to accomplish different things. And then whenever you come down between Miravis and Triva Pro, okay, well, we all have group 11s, 3s, and 7s. I've got them all. Got my strobe, my triazole, my SDHI. Well, the SDHI components are completely different between these 2. They're going to do different things. So what I like to do is, Crop Protection Network, at the top of the slide, you can Google Crop Protection Network. It's independent universities that rate fungicides on what pathogens they're against. It's a great place to go and start and look at. I don't agree with 100% of the ratings that are up there. But like Miravis, Triva Pro, excellent on gray leaf. Veltima, very good to excellent. Something I'd say you should know on these ratings. Excellent means it's good. Very good means it's okay. And if they rate it as good, it's probably not good at all. Nobody's going to put it's poor. So recalibrate your mind to that. And like I'll even back up on that. So Veltima, notice there's even a rate change at the top here. So depending on which rate they evaluate that at, are you running 7 ounce or 10 ounce? Which rate are you using? Well, fungicide didn't work. Well, did you spray 7 ounce and this guy sprayed 10? Did that extra 3 ounces do something? We look at rust, Miravis Neo at, very good to Triva Pro at excellent. Well, they all had 11s, 3s, and 7s from our group fungicides for actives, but they have a different component. One product's changed. From a southern rust standpoint on Veltima, a 10 ounce rate's probably okay. 7 ounce, probably not going to do much. I don't think that rating's, probably very good. It's probably where it should fall. And then you look at like tar spot. Neo's better on tar spot than I think it's rated from the Crop Protection Network. And Veltima's probably rated better than it should be. Now, I list these specifically because think about your last 3 years. 2023 here, we were at dry finish, low disease pressure kind of year. I think Veltima had the advantage. That pyroxystrobins are known for that plant health component, a greening effect. I think they're better there. 2024 on the late planted corn. So I'm talking about that last portion of May where guys finished up with, who got annihilated by tar spot? I know some in this room did. So Neo had an advantage in 24 compared to a Triva Pro or Veltima. Then this last year, nobody could really plant hardly anything in April. Everything got really late. Southern rust came in bad. In my opinion, Triva Pro is the best product on the market for southern rust. So if you had somebody that ran 7 ounce Veltima this year, fungicide didn't work for me, your Triva Pro guys with rust probably saw 30 bushel. So if you're making comparisons, the main thing to do is, well, what is our goal with the fungicide? What are we trying to protect? What's our disease pressure? What do we need to do? Not just go out and spray a fungicide. These are too expensive to just go out blindly and do it. Now, can we predict the year? Absolutely not. I don't know what 26 is going to bring. But what you can do is you probably know what you have ordered seed-wise. You can sit down with your seed guys and be like, okay, what do I have that's susceptible to tar spot? What's susceptible to southern rust? Those are going to be your biggies. Gray leaf's never your thing. We'll always have some aspect of it out there. And if you've got hybrids that are probably weak on rust, book Triva Pro. If you've got hybrids that are going to be weak on tar spot, probably go ahead and book your Mirvis Neo. Have a split between the two. If you think we're going to have that drought year, run Beltiva. I know I talk to some that are always, drought years every year. So I think those.
Type of application, whether you're spraying 2 gallon acre with a drone or 20 with a sprayer.
I've gotten down to more who can be there timely and what can that operator do. I have seen really bad ground rigs. I've seen bad helicopter operators. I've seen bad drone operators. You can look across any kind of data that's out there, and some will say, well, drone's better at 2 gallon because of mixing time, or ground rig's better because you got better coverage. I come down to the operator as my preference, who can be there timely and do a good job. And I think that'll trump. So the time frame portion is interesting, and it's one of the, I guess it'll be in the slide after this one. So think about when your disease is coming in. What's your year? Like, let's actually go out and look in the field. What do we have? Think about through June. What do we have from a disease standpoint? What's coming in? Rust came in late this year, so if we would have went at tassel, we were probably too early. If I go back to 2024 on that May corn, there's a September 4th. 9 days later on the 13th and 24th. A little bit of the milk line still coming through. It's kind of a question of like, is this going to, black layer or die? Weren't really sure which. So to your point around that of, well, what's the timing on it? Again, depends on our pressure and what's out there. Walker field before it tassels. What do we have in that lower canopy? A lot of these diseases from like a gray leaf standpoint is going to float up through the plant. Your tar spot or rust are probably going to be more of those upper leaves. Rust might be a little more random. But do we see lesions early? If we don't, so we don't have the pathogen there yet. Okay, well, what's our environmental conditions? Do we have a 10-day window of clear, low humidity, favorable for disease? If it's not, yeah, let's drag our feet, push that application back later to extend that protection. If we have all that bad weather coming in, like this last year, we had some spots through July of good rainfall. Yeah, move that application in earlier, consider a second, go a higher rate to extend residual. Because a lot of times, you're looking at 60 days for grain fill, hopefully, and a fungicide is going to protect 20 of those days, say 3 weeks. So position it based on what pressure you have, because a fungicide doesn't add yield. All it does is protect yield. If you don't see a response from a fungicide, well, then you didn't have yield potential, or you didn't need to protect it. You didn't have something that took it away. So a lot of it just comes down to what do we have and making sure we're ahead of it. Now, you don't want to wait, coming in when you already see some of these things that are this spread, you're too late. So that's where you're like, yeah, just look at your forecast. What's your susceptibility on hybrid? What do you think your risk is?
One thing that I tell everybody when it comes to if you're planning on doing fungicide, I generally like to recommend a BTR1. Because the problem is if you start looking at the weather and it starting to get pretty bad, hot, wet, stressful, that's when the disease really likes to take off anyways. And all of a sudden you want to go, oh, I want to start spraying fungicide R1 and make that phone call. Unfortunately, that list is pretty long at that point. So there is an application, there's a line that forms with fungicide every single year. There's less and less guys flying it, less and less ground rigs wanting to do with it. So that line gets long. So I'd like to be a little proactive of, if you're going to book it, generally shoot for BTR1. That's still our best time frame. Or if you see a really stressful year and you want to bump it up to like B14. That's when I make a lot of applications. And with the new fungicides, especially Triopro Mirvis, I don't feel uncomfortable spraying those at B14. But yeah, if you're going with something cheaper, BTR1 is still when you see the best plant health response to it.
Yep. And yeah, good point around that. I mean, 2 points. You asked which one's application. Okay, well, who can get there timely? Because if you get the long lines, you're going to be 2 weeks. Yeah, switch applicator, get somebody else. and when I talk about shifting that back, I wouldn't go later than R3. That's as far back as I feel comfortable. And to hit that R3 timing, it's okay. I'm pretty dry. I'm tasseled. I don't see disease pressure yet. 10-day forecast looks fine. I'm still going to probably call it in by the time I'm fully silked out, in hopes of it being done by brown silk if I'm going to shift it back later.
Another one thing to think about, because we, for example, sell all of these options. You get the full line from every company, and you have the generic options as well. So you can even get stuff coordinated, who you're going to have apply it, whether we coordinate it for you, get somebody else. we can switch which products you want to do. You can have in mind, I think I'm gonna run with this one, and then we get into the season, you're like, it's kind of shifting gears. I need to look at something like this, or I need to adjust the timing. Just a little bit of communication goes really, really far. And the other thing I would point out, like Brian was discussing the application rate, ask those questions on who's going to be applying it to make sure they're running the rate that you want ran. Don't let them just say, oh, it's this much per acre. You're like, well, what am I getting for that much per acre? Don't tell me it's full load. What is that full load? I want to know what it is. That's why I would say on seed treatment, on any of this stuff, don't just assume they're putting the full rate. Ask those questions. They should know that immediately. Pretty simple. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. And something that maybe ask Jake back there on the drones, because something I've encountered when I have guys doing drones, been a big hot topic on that. Well, some are spraying at a 26-foot swath, and some are at 30, and some are 32, and I've had some at 36, and it's all because, well, this is what the machine does. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm looking at all these, 3 different guys with T50s, and they're all spraying on a different swath. So it's like, make sure the applicator that's running it knows what they're doing. But, oh yeah, got some neat wheat pictures I can show you on that one that are not in here.
I do have a chart up there. It's on the ground. It's a chart made by Nature. You can look at that, which I'll pick that up and show you real quick. But when you guys are looking around later on, whenever Brian's talking about different application timing, you can look at this and kind of see when, at what stage here's VT, and when it's uptaking a lot of those nutrients, the percent of when it's gathering that stuff. And we have books over here that lay that out too. And it's just good information to have whenever you're making some of those decisions. Somebody says, well, I'm going to go put on a tassel. You're like, okay, is that the best time for my crop? It's going to make the most of it because it's protecting itself while it's taking those nutrients. So we have books over here too that have these on a smaller version.
So then shifting gears, and I want to talk about this one in terms of hybrids and varieties, just because a lot of guys got done booking seed. And I always find this fascinating. So I've got a variety of soybeans, one in blue, one in orange. One's averaging 90, almost 92. The other's at 86. Well, which one do you want? You're looking at plot data. Plots are coming in. Which do we pick? Most guys, both would say those are both highly acceptable yields. and these 3 bars are cut by slope in this case. We'd probably want the blue variety. Now, if we look at the other extreme, we start looking at, okay, we've got a lower yield environment. We've got this blue variety at 72. This orange one's still almost maintaining at 80. Which variety would you pick? Probably the one at 80. Most guys go in and it's like, I'm going to pick the plot average, which is going to sit right here in this middle low stress where they're both really close and there's no difference. And the point I reference on this is I see conversation with guys all the time. It's like, seed guy shows up, I want your best 3. Give me your best 3 varieties, hybrids, whatever. Okay, well, is it the best 3 for this? Because that's what everybody seems to focus on. And we need to remember, like, we have these tougher, rougher acres. We need the best 3 for that. Doesn't mean they're plot winners. They shouldn't be plot winners. They're for that tough acre. Once in a while, you get a stray one. And I just wanted to comment on that because that's something every year I always see, and I always see guys seem to forget about. And it's a good time to go in, as you're sitting there with your seed guys, like, okay, where am I going to place this year? Where's this variety or hybrid actually meant? And make sure we have a placement plan. Now, I understand sometimes on operations, I'm going to pull boxes out of the shed and I'm just going to, wherever we're dry, that's where we're going. That's what's going to happen. Maybe the first 500 acres has a plan and the last 500 acres has a plan, but everything in the middle is just going to be where it lands. It's a good time, I think, to start thinking through, okay, logistically, a seed gets delivered, how are we going to position the field? It's worth having a placement plan. And I think it's interesting because, like in this case, you can pick up 6 bushel having the right bean on the better acre. I mean, what's 6 bushel of beans today? $60 an acre. I think beans maybe $10.80 last I looked at St. Louis, so maybe a little better than that. Or on the low end down here, another 6 bushel an acre. So you start thinking about what value is there to taking time to do placement. It's in my mind, an easy way to pick up some dollars an acre. $40-$50 just from having placement. So as we go through the rest of January, February, thinking through, if you obviously you've got some things booked from Adam, it's good to probably sit through and be like, okay, let's make sure I know where this goes. Have a plan. It's one of the easiest ROI places guys can get that gets overlooked. So Any questions on just picking through some products, varieties? Hopefully that was at least an interesting concept on it. So last portion is fertility. Who choked on their fertilizer bills this year? I'm sure a few. Think through your neighbors. Who cut back? Who do you think cut back for 2026? Do you think guys cut back late full bore? Or just think about where you think maybe what guys or what adjustments guys made. Of acres I look at or involved in, there's about 62,000 that are, call it this Southwest Illinois portion. So these are all local of operations I work with. Shade over 30,000, we made no adjustment on fertilizer. We had good yields. We rolled forward. That's great for them. About 12,000, we were very selective. We went through a strategy, had a plan. How are we going to hit a budget for a whole farm? And had about 18,000 that, to fit budgets, we had to cut everything. Now, what degree do we cut? Like, what do we do? Do you just, I'm going to skip dry on these fields? I see guys that sometimes like, well, that's my worst field, so I'm going to put on less. Well, it's my lowest yielding, so I put on less, and now it's going to be less. And it's kind of a, what do you expect? Exactly. It's going to happen. So I think there's some strategies and things to think about to be cognizant of, you don't want to cut your nose off to spite of your face kind of thing. We can have a plan. And, you look at, corn report wasn't favorable the other day. Who knows where prices are going to go? I'm not a marketer. Terrible at it, really. So hopefully I can give some insights here based on conversations I have, especially with new growers that I work with. When's the last time you soil tested? And I thought this was fun too, because all of these that are in this tray came from the same field. So you've got some farms that are, might have white soil, red, yellow, clay, black, nice, productive. That's in some certain veins. So you think through that variability that's out there, and then think through, okay, well, when's the last time you had a soil sample pulled? Some growers, it's like, oh yeah, I've got something recent. And you hand me something from 2018. Like, I don't think I'd call that recent. You've harvested a lot of crop and applied a lot of fertilizer in between. Are soil tests accurate? Who believes in the accuracy of a soil test? I'd say probably 3/4 of this room does, and 25% think they're crap. Would be my guess. And a new concept that I can introduce to you on thinking around a soil test is, no, I don't believe they're accurate. You take a 5-gallon bucket of soil, send it to 3 different labs, you're going to get 3 different results. You just absolutely are. But they're an indication of where that acre's at. Are you generally high or are you generally low? Not an absolute value. Like say, you send a test in, one lab says you're 30 pounds an acre on P, one says you're 25, the other one might say you're 35. Well, in general, you're probably right around 30. So think about them from an absolute value, or not an absolute value, but a generalized direction, an indication that you've got a higher probability to fertilizer response. What conditions were they sampled in? This last fall, a lot of dry conditions. Your phosphate probably read fine. Your soil pH was probably artificially low. Buffer pH should have been okay depending on which method they used. And your K is artificially low. So think about what conditions did we pull in? If you pulled in a really dry soil, said your K was at 220 pounds an acre and you want to be at 3. Okay, well, is it really at 220 if you pull in dry conditions, or is it higher than that? So you don't want to spend money on fertilizer that you don't need because your test didn't represent it. So it's always good things to ask. What grid size are you on? It's always the other thing that's amazing. Some guys want to be on 1 acre grids, which I think is pretty intense. I see a lot of 2.5 to 5s, some 10s. And then I've came to guys that are like, I've got 3 samples for the farm. I'm like, that's pretty wide range. So just recognize, well, what kind of information are you making decisions off of? And then if you've got a current soil test, but it's a couple years ago, what's your applied history? If you're going to cut back, make reductions on a field, you can't cut the same field over and over and over and have a result. If you're going to make a cut, it probably should be moved and shuffled on the next round. So have a strategy around it. I think capturing the variability. So I wanted to highlight one of these examples, and to me, it all looks white. I can't see a single color the way I'm sitting at this screen, but I don't know if you can see some of the color changes that exist across this field. So I wanted to walk through, how I look at this acre. This portion is more what I specialize in. This is what I work through with my growers. And we've got different OM contributions, and with these OM, probably different CECs, and that's going to reflect a little bit of that nutrient availability and what's going to be mineralized from the soil. And if you're on a 4.5 acre grid, roughly these blocks, and it's like, there's places that a composite sample from a 4.5 acre, we're probably okay, but some of these blocks, OM's a lot different, CEC's different. It's going to reflect how much potash, how much K you can actually have available to the crop. Pulled up soil Surgo. I should have looked. I think Surgo was maybe in the 70s, made hand-drawn maps of just kind of what they thought. So I've seen guys, we'll set soil test points within these grids, VR seeding, the VR applications. It's like, probably in the front, matches okay with what that field looks like. Towards the back, I think it's a little off. And my whole point around this is, and this is where I specialize, and this is how I see that field. This is an SWI map with soil test points. You can move into a grid. Afterwards, if you want to see what a map, I can generate one of these for any farm. So if you want to see an SWI on a specific field to see how it looks on your own, can do so. And I started thinking about, okay, well, where's water move? How's that going to influence things? How's it going to match erosion? What's my higher spots, my lower spots? What's actually going on in those environments? That's better information to have when we're making decisions. And then once you have decisions, like, okay, here's my fertility record. Well, now what do I have? Now what do I do from a fertility application standpoint? And I don't know, do you guys ever reference like the U of I Agronomy handbook or your guys, fertilizer guys, or, okay, we're going to build to this rate. Okay, well, what rate is that? And I always think this is fascinating. So I kind of recreated this from what U of I showed at CCA conference a couple years ago. And the whole concept on critical is, where does yield stabilize? And at a high concentration at some point, yield starts to become very stable and it's a diminishing return. And at a lower end perspective, you get all this variability associated with that low sample. And it's interesting on that because, okay, high spots, low spots, we've got fields that look like this, we've got fields that look like this, you've got saturated and water limited, and nobody really accounts for this today in our fertility application methods. I count for it on a very granular level. I think even without that, you can think about the fields you have. Some of you have fields that are like this and some have like this. Which one should you cut fertility back on? Most guys would say, well, it's my best acre. I'm going to keep my fertility here. And I'm going to cut here because it's my worst acre. Well, if you think about how fertility actually moves in, do you ever think about how your plant actually takes up P and K? Does anybody know how it takes up? So it's through diffusion. Roughly 9, so this is from a Corteva slide, but 91% of P comes in through diffusion, 78 comes in through for potassium. These rough numbers. They will look at U of I's handbook, they show maybe 85 on phosphorus and 80 for potassium. But the whole idea of this is, if you have a high concentration of nutrient and then a low concentration, it's going to move over. Think about your basic chemistry, positive, negative charge. It's got to be in solution with water to do that. And if you think back to these fields, you're in solution with water a lot more than you are here. So it's okay, well, what is our fertility response on that rougher field versus this flatter, more productive acre? Are they going to respond to fertility in the same way? So I start to think about, okay, well, how does landscape position influence our nutrient uptake? You think about a saturated acre, like one of those flat acres I showed before, maybe don't require quite as much from a P and K standpoint. Well, at least on the P side. K depends on CEC and other tie-up mechanisms. Versus that water limited acre, lot higher need to drive yield. A few of you I overheard earlier talk about going to precision planting. I think they talked about this whole concept of precision fertility. That's what this is. If anybody else is going to the winter conference, that's what they talk about. So it's cut your phosphates back here if we're making a decision, but don't cut here. That rougher rolling, your nutrient uptake is going to be limited. Your response is going to be higher there. Now, typically, what's my lower yielding ground? I want to cut back less. So you spend less and it yields less and you put on less and it goes downhill. All sounds great in theory, so I've got some examples from growers I work with in these cases. I'm like, okay, let's look at CEC. So what this graph is, I group C from a 5 to 10, and then 10 to 15, and a 15 to 20. 5 to 10 is going to be your lighter ground. Think about your light timber soils. 10 to 15 is probably going to be more your average. This 15 to 20 is going to be your flat black. And you look at a fertility response. So each one of these bars across here is phosphorus in terms of, what level or what P rate do we have in the soil. Yellow bars are a lot lower P rate. Say they were around 15 parts per million. Green would have been closer to 30 parts per million, and that gradient change. There is about a 20 bushel spread on that lighter soil in response to those phosphates, and a 2 bushel response on that flatter ground. But yet what I see guys do is, okay, my best acre, I'm going to keep putting my fertility on. Now, you don't want to mine this down. Like, don't misunderstand. You still need fertility raised bushels. I'm not saying you can't have fertility there. But cutting there is going to be your poorest ROI. And you think about going through this year, this is going to be the acre that is going to be cost you the least to cut on. Another way to look at that is, okay, well, there's a soil wetness map I showed up, this whole concept of landscape position, elevation. Pulled up a yield on this. This green bar would be a more water limited rolling hill. This would be a flatter portion of the same field. There's a 20 bushel spread. I didn't break it out from fertility, but from what I showed before, we can drive that yield and increase it. So if we're going to spread fertilizer, this is one of my phosphate maps for this past year. It's like, okay, if I'm flatter, soil test is built, that's great. But if I've got these really water limited ridges, let's go ahead and get some high race. You can spread to these levels. We don't have to be in these square blocky things that I still see come out of retail. Like, we've got enough technology, we can make this better than what we do today. Thought it's a neat concept. First time I saw these, looked interesting. And like I say, those rates might even look high. I don't know. It's like a 237 for an average spread on mez for a 1 year spread. That one's high. A lot of different histories on that field though, where it's at from a productivity standpoint. The next thing that's always interesting is everybody's like, well, I'm going to cut back. I'm not going to put phosphates on my beans, but I'll still spread potash. Beans need a lot of K. So I thought this was a really neat concept to show. Here is bean yield graphed by K level. We have a concept of here's that critical value we want to be at for 40 below at 20 to 40. And that is flat across the board on a bean response. It's like, well, hell, why am I spreading potash on beans then? Well, it's interesting if you go in and it's like, okay, let's sort it out and look at phosphate first. Phosphate drives growth to make plants taller. And basically, across each one of these buckets is a phosphate level, and then each bar is a K level. And if you're short on P, I don't see a response to K in beans. You don't have enough phosphate to grow a plant to make enough of a sink for that K to actually support. But once we get our levels built, now we actually get a response to K. So one of the whole points behind that is if you're going to cut, like, okay, well, phosphate's the most expensive, I'm not going to spread ahead of my bean crop. Well, I would argue that putting the money in the potash, if your P level is not where it should be, is a waste of time because you're not going to get the benefit. So it's just another way to think through, how do we efficiently make some decisions around fertility? Think about your landscape position, what fertility you're there, how accurate your information that you're making decisions off of. Because when you take that fertility bill, what those phosphates are at, if you're $100 an acre on dry fertilizer, 2,500 acre farm, you're spending $250,000 a year. I mean, literally in a soil test of 4-year life, it's $1 million question. Like, you probably want decent information, and the number of people that don't is mind blowing to me. So it's a good reference point to just think about going back home, pull up your soil test, how current are they, what decisions you've made, and then again make a plan versus guys, well, I'm just going to cut. Well, think about where you're cutting. So that was an awful lot. 3 take-home points. So to bring it back in, if you take nothing else from today, if all that was completely boring and nothing else important, the 3 things that I think you should take home and leave with here is 1, red crown rot, you're in a hot spot. You should have Victrado. If you're not going to put Victrado on because it's, I don't know what it is, $2, $3, $4 a unit.
More expensive after today.
Well, maybe. We could have a conversation about that one. I had another seed dealer from another company ask me what I would pay for it. And I told him what I thought it was worth. And he's like, well, damn, I may have charged you way too little. So I personally expected it to be a lot higher price than what it was. When you're making product comparisons, make sure it's relevant to your situation. Make sure you understand all the factors that are going in. Not all fungicides are equal. Not all hybrids and varieties that win plots are equal. Think through having a plan, having discussions, make sure it's applicable to your situation. When you can go home and talk to, call up your seed guys, your chemical guys, like, hey, am I having the best plan for me in 26 based on what I have? And then, like I say, a fertility standpoint, make good thoughts. Go home, review when your last soil tests were pulled, know what you've actually applied from a fertility standpoint. And as you go make cuts through, think about where you're actually making cuts and does it make sense, or are the dollars right way? Yep.
What do you think about making cuts on like a strip till? Put drying a strip, how much would you cut rates in strip till opposed to just broadcasting?
So it's always interesting. So I have several guys that I work with that are in strip till, especially you start getting towards like, Auburn, Gerard, Burn, that really good soil. And end of the day, removal's removal. So I've not cut rates back in strips because that crop's still going to take what it wants. What we have found is whenever you get into drier conditions, those plants don't look back. Where everybody else is broadcast and you're tied up in the soil and nutrient mobility is limited. Yeah, you watch all these other ones shut down where they hit super dry conditions and crop never shows a stress. So I don't think you can cut rate, but boy, you really hedge on dry weather. Yeah. So with that, any other thoughts, questions? Think about what you're doing different in 26.
If you have questions, feel free to ask me. Everybody, I know some guys get a little shy about asking something, but if you're thinking, there's probably half a dozen other guys who are also thinking. If someone comes to you, you can always jot it down and we can come back to it.
Yeah, and like I say, you can chat with me afterwards too, or.
Okay. Well, we can take a few minute break while Zach kind of gets set up. Anybody needs to use the restroom or get a refill or anything. If anybody wants coffee, it's right over the corner. I can show you where that's at. So 5 minutes and we'll fire back up.
All right. I do.
Perfect. I'm just gonna stay yours then so we're not unplugging and plugging stuff in.
Oh, there we go. Perfect.